Mammalian heart is four-chambered heart. Heart is located in the thoracic or chest cavity in between the two lungs and is slightly tilted towards the left side in a space called mediastinum. The anterior chambers of the heart are known as atria and the posterior chambers are called as ventricles. First we focus on the external part of the heart. So heart is surrounded by two pericardial membranes. Outer is known as parietal pericardium and inner is visceral pericardium. So in between these two pericardial membranes is the pericardial space which is filled with pericardial fluid. Now if you observe, the wall of the heart is in turn made of three layers like epicardium and myocardium and endocardium. So epicardium is the outermost layer which is closely connected with the visceral pericardium, and middle myocardium is with cardiac muscles and inner endocardium is with squamous epithelium. Fine. So there are anterior two chambers are known as atria and the posterior are called as ventricles. Atria are the thin walled chambers. Your right atrium is larger and left atrium is smaller. Right atrium is large and left atrium is small. Both atria are separated by interatrial septum, and these interatrial septum in the embryonic stages, that means in the fetal stage, it has an opening called foramen ovale which directs the blood from the atrium into the left atrium, right to left atrium, it directs the blood. Next, after birth, due to the pressure, the foramen ovale gets closed, leaving an oval patch which is called fossa ovalis. Fine. This is with the pressures, the closure of this foramen ovale occurs. Failure of this foramen ovale to get closed is known as patent foramen ovale. Fine. Now your right atrium, as I said, it's a larger chamber as it receives deoxygenated blood from all parts of the body by means of vena cava. So this is your inferior vena cava. So with the help of this inferior vena cava, heart right atrium receives blood from all posterior parts of the body, and from anterior parts of the body the blood is collected by superior vena cava. Superior vena cava, with which it receives blood from anterior parts of the body. So the blood will be received by the atrium. Fine. Opening of this inferior vena cava into the right atrium. So just to make it clear, so I am just making this diagram. So this is inferior vena cava is opening into the right atrium. So opening of this inferior vena cava into the right atrium is guarded by Eustachian valve. Now remember, this Eustachian valve is functional in only fetal heart, because the function of this Eustachian valve is to direct the blood into the foramen ovale. So after birth, once the foramen ovale gets closed, Eustachian valve becomes vestigial, non-functional, it gets mixed up in the musculature. Next, heart collects blood from all parts of the body with the help of your inferior vena cava and superior vena cava. Heart also collects blood from its own muscles by coronary veins. Those coronary veins fuse and form coronary sinus, and this coronary sinus opens into right atrium. So here we have the opening of this inferior vena cava is with Eustachian valve, and opening of this coronary sinus is with valve of Thebesius. These are the two valves which becomes vestigial in the adult heart, right? Next, so opening of this superior vena cava into the right atrium is not guarded by any valves. Fine. So this is your right atrium. Your right atrium is with the deoxygenated blood which is collected from all parts of the body. Next, your left atrium. As I said, this entire part is your left atrium. This is left atrium. Left atrium is smaller, and left atrium receives oxygenated blood from lungs with the help of pulmonary veins. With the help of pulmonary veins, your left atrium receives oxygenated blood. See, look, the number of pulmonary veins opening into the left atrium are 4. Remember, there is a direction. So all the way the pulmonary veins open into the left atrium and collects the oxygenated blood. Fine. Your right atrium is with deoxygenated blood and left atrium is with oxygenated blood. The deoxygenated blood of the right atrium enters into your right ventricle, and the oxygenated blood of the left atrium enters into left ventricle. So your atrium and ventricle, the right atrium and right ventricle, left atrium and left ventricle. So atria and ventricles are separated by atrioventricular septa. The septum of the right atrioventricular septum is guarded by valves. This is called tricuspid valve. The opening of right atrium into right ventricle is guarded by tricuspid valve. The opening of the left atrium into the left ventricle is guarded by bicuspid valve. This bicuspid valve is known as mitral valve. Fine. Now this is about atria. So both atria are separated by interatrial septum with foramen, ovale in the fetal stage, and it gets closed in the adult heart, leaving a patch called fossa ovalis, and then right atrium receives deoxygenated blood and left atrium receives oxygenated blood with the help of 4 pulmonary veins. So 3 blood vessels are opening into your right atrium. Those includes your inferior vena cava, superior vena cava and coronary sinus. So opening of this inferior vena cava is guarded by Eustachian valve and coronary sinuses by Thebesius valve. Now, ventricles are thick-walled. Ventricles are thick-walled, and your right ventricle is small. This right ventricle is small, and your left ventricle is large. Your right atrium is large, left atrium is small, right ventricle is small, left ventricle is large. So both ventricles are thick-walled. Your left ventricle is more thicker than your right ventricle. So same, both ventricles are separated by interventricular septum. Just we focus on inside the walls of the ventricles. In the walls of the ventricles, there are several ridges. These ridges are known as columnae corneae. These ridges further continue and form conical elevations, and these conical elevations are known as papillary muscles. There are several ridges. The ridges are called columnae corneae, and these ridges further continue and give rise to conical elevations which are known as papillary muscles. Fine. Now, these papillary muscles which are present in the wall of the ventricle are connected to the atrioventricular valves. This is a bicuspid valve. This is a tricuspid valve. There is a connection, right? You can see this green layer. These greens are connections, the green lines. So your papillary muscles are connected to the tricuspid valve, and here they're connected to the bicuspid valve. So these are atrioventricular valves. So these connections between the atrioventricular valves and papillary muscles are known as chorda tendineae. These are fibroelastic bands. The connections are called as chorda tendineae. So fine. Next, for the blood, deoxygenated blood that is collected into the right atrium through tricuspid valve enters into the right ventricle. So from right ventricle arises your pulmonary aorta. We call it as pulmonary aorta. So this is pulmonary aorta. Which carry deoxygenated blood from right ventricle to the lungs for oxygenation. Fine. After the blood gets oxygenated through these pulmonary veins, the oxygenated blood is collected into the left atrium through the bicuspid valve. It enters into the left ventricle. So from the left ventricle, the blood is carried by your systemic aorta. This is systemic aorta. Now, in the fetal stage, in the embryonic stages, this pulmonary and systemic aorta both are connected. This is your systemic aorta. Both are connected by ductus arteriosus. When one's lungs becomes functional, when foramen ovale gets closed, ductus arteriosus is closed, leaving ligamentum arteriosum. So remember, this ligamentum arteriosum is found in the adult heart, and in the fetal heart you can see ductus arteriosus. Fine. Your pulmonary and systemic aortas are also guarded by valves. Now, the valves of the pulmonary aorta are known as pulmonary semilunar valves, and the valves of your systemic aorta are known as aortic semilunar valves. Semilunar valves. So fine. Now we have a tricuspid valve. First, this is your bicuspid valve between atria and ventricles. Then we have pulmonary valve. That's nothing but pulmonary semilunar valves. This is aortic semilunar valve, Eustachian valve, valve of Tibesius. There are 6 valves, but in the adult functional valves are 4: your tricuspid valve, your bicuspid valve, and your pulmonary valves and aortic valves. Right? So this is what is the structure of the heart. So in this, your left side part of the heart, your right side of the heart, your right atrium and right ventricle. So right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from all parts of the body, and it enters into the right ventricle, where right ventricle carry this to the lungs for oxygenation. This right side part is with deoxygenated blood and left side part is with oxygenated blood.